Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Thanks for tuning in to our Monday, November 16th coronavirus update, our 2 o'clock update. We're seeing an increase in the coronavirus numbers here in Westchester County, as we are seeing across the state and across the nation, that are very concerning to all of us. With that thought in mind, we are going to resume now twice weekly updates in this fashion, every Monday and every Thursday. So the next update after today's update will come this coming Thursday. And then the week of Thanksgiving, we'll do it on the Wednesday before the Thanksgiving holiday. The things that are happening at a very fast speed. We in the county government and those in local governments and in other entities are going to have to move quickly to respond to these things, and we want to be able to keep you informed in real time as to how those things are happening. So we'll have another one of these updates on Thursday, and we'll take it from there. I'm joined today by Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the actions that we're taking to deal with this, clearly the second wave that we're facing now in COVID. As I've often said, we are neither going to fearmonger nor are we going to sugarcoat. This is no time for sugarcoating. We were all very proud of what had happened in the months of May to June, July, August, and a fair bit of September. As here in Westchester County, we saw a diminution of the infection. We went through major holidays without incidents. We had a couple little potential things that didn't materialize. And so we felt good, but we also knew that it was predicted by all of the healthcare professionals that we would see a second wave, and I think we're now clearly seeing that second wave in the number of infections and the spread of the infections. Our statistics through today from the New York State tracker that's made available to us each day, we have a total from year to date of 44,576 cases. 41,061 of those cases have gone through the 2-week incubation period, leaving us with 3,515 active cases. That is a significant number. It is a number that correlates to where we were in the month of May. And, of course, March and April were our peak months. We started to come down from the mountaintop in the month of May and went down until lower numbers in June, July, August, September, as I've just described. But the 3,500 number is very concerning to all of us. And just to give you the examples, 1 week ago today when I last gave this report, we had 2,252 active cases. That is an increase of 1,300 active cases in the last week. That's almost a doubling from where we were. 2 weeks ago, we were at 1,513 cases, and that is more than a doubling over the course of 2 weeks in the number of active cases. If you go back almost, it seems like another life to go back to where we were in the middle of October. Here we are roughly in the middle of November. This is the 16th. If we looked at the 16th of October, we were at 942 cases. And today we are at 3,515 cases. Now, it may be argued by many people that the more you test, the more cases you have, and the more active cases you have within a 2-week period of time, that reflects the higher number. We tested yesterday 6,167 individuals, and we had 230 individuals test positive. That is a significant increase over where we were if we look back over the past periods of time. I'll pick out any sort of arbitrary date. We'll go back slightly over a month ago to October 9th, where we had 7,257 tests. That is 1,100 more tests on the prior date than we had yesterday. And on that date, we had 77 people tested positive as opposed to yesterday, 230. So it is not just the total amount of testing, it is the rate of infection that is increasing. Now, if we had an increased rate that approached 10%, then we'd have 616 cases. We do not. We have 230 cases. So we're roughly in the 3 to 4% range, 3.5% range right now of infection. A big jump up from being under 1%, which is where we were throughout that period of time, not yet in the double-digit numbers that would reflect the peak of transmission that we had in the early spring. But the line is heading straight up. It's an increase across the board. We look next, after we look at the number of people that are active cases, as to how many people are hospitalized. When we met 2 weeks ago, we had 47 people hospitalized on this date 2 weeks ago. The last number we have is 121. That's almost, not quite, a tripling of the number of people hospitalized. And hospitalization is the degree of illness of a person who has an active case. Many people have active cases, the vast majority of them. It does not affect them to the point at which they have to be hospitalized. But now we're seeing hospitalization numbers go up, as there's an increase in the degree of severity of the number of cases. And then, of course, the statistic that follows hospitalization is that of fatalities. We have lost in the last week 11 people, and if we go back over a 2-week period, we lost 17 people. In the last 2 weeks, we've lost 17 lives to COVID. In the months of July and August combined, we lost 11 people. 2 months, 11 people, 2 weeks, and we've lost 17 people. So we are clearly in a position where this virus is spreading. It's spreading over an aggressive fashion, and it's something that we are very concerned about. There's a number of different things that we can do. The first most immediate things that we can do deal with ourselves in the county government as a workforce employer. And so Ken Jenkins, our Deputy County Executive, who works very closely with our Director of Operations, Joan McDonald, and the other members of our executive team, we've made some decisions as to how we're going to handle our workforce and then also what we're going to do with our boards and commissions. So I wanted Ken to be able to update us on that. Ken?
Thank you, George. And because the contagion continues to advance and we're in the middle of that second wave, effective November 23rd for county employees, where it's possible, we're going to have a maximum of 25% of the county workforce where it's possible. We're going to take the time to reevaluate at the beginning of next year, but beginning November 23rd, a maximum of 25% of the county workforce where it's possible. In addition, our boards and commissions are 100% virtual. There has been our virtual boards and commissions for many months, but some of the boards have been beginning to meet in person. All boards and commissions for the county of Westchester will be remote. Thank you.
It's important to note that the county government has a number of different departments that do very different things. We have departments that provide services like the law department, the budget department, finance department, human resources department, and they are all services that are necessary, separate departments within the county government, and they primarily are departments where people can, to the greater extent, work remotely. Our budget department doesn't have that flexibility right now because we're in budget season, and a lot of the work that we're doing with the Board of Legislators, which we'll touch on before we complete our conversation today, has to be done in person. But most of the rest of those departments have the capacity for remote work. That is also true of our planning department, parts of our Department of Public Works, and some of the other departments of county government. Excuse me. However, we operate a county jail, and so that requires presence on site for Westchester County workers to a significant degree. We operate sewer treatment, wastewater treatment plants. That requires a presence at the work site. We have a county public safety department, county police, who must police the parkways and the parks of Westchester County. Those are in-person situations. So the ability to be completely remote is not possible, as it would be if we were a corporation providing a product or a service and we had executive or administrative offices, which could be remote. But I think it's important to note we employ roughly 4,500 individuals in Westchester County. What Ken pointed out is our effort now to try to reduce the number of people that come to a workstation and thereby interact with other people. And we have no authority as a county government to instruct other businesses to do the same, but we think the time is now for all businesses, particularly those that have office-related, administrative-related functions, to take voluntary steps to reduce the in-present workforce, to reduce the number of people that are out in the community and potentially getting exposed to the virus. We are at a situation where nothing has been mandated. If a mandate comes, it'll come from Governor Cuomo, who has done that earlier in the year. We'll do so again as he sees fit. But in the meantime, we want to take preemptive action if we can in this and a host of other areas. Again, I want to compliment Ken and Joan McDonald and our operations team for trying to work through these things in a real-world fashion. I want to highlight that what has been established by the governor, which you've seen a lot of in the last few days, we've mentioned it now over the last week or so, is the establishment of colored zones that represent increasing amount of infection and therefore an increasing amount of shutdown of interactions and an additional effort to go into those zones to try to affect the rate of infection. Here in Westchester County, we have one community that has been identified so far with a zone, and the three ratings of the zones are yellow to orange to red, and that's increasing severity. Imagine if you're driving and you approach a traffic light, you see a yellow light, that's a cautionary note. Red is ultimately stop. In between the intermediate zone, which we don't have in a traffic light, would be orange. As the color gets more intense, the concern gets more intense. Working through those, the yellow zone is a precautionary zone, and that was the original designation for Portchester. And I might add that parts of that yellow zone also included the adjacent village of Rye Brook, and a very small portion went over into the borders of the city of Rye. We are working with the county to make sure, with the state, to make sure that they tighten the geography, to make sure that it makes logical sense. The zones have to be structured where there is an intense presence of the infection. It's not just meant to follow a jurisdictional boundary per se, but to cluster where the cases have clustered. And Portchester, although it has a population that we'll see what the census tells us, somewhere in the range of 40,000 people. That is not, among the largest of our jurisdictions. We have at least 4 cities that have a much higher population than Portchester. The density of Portchester is what we think has been the determining factor for the governor's concerns. So in the yellow zone, in the precautionary zone, houses of worship are to operate at 50% capacity. If you go to a church and the capacity is 1,000 people or 500 people, you operate 50% capacity of that number. Mass gatherings, any kind of cluster of people, most recently Veterans Day services we've had, any other public gatherings, has to reduce from the current standard of 50 people maximum under the yellow zone, precautionary zone, to 25 people becomes the maximum number. Businesses remain open under the yellow zone designation. Dining remains open, as does retail businesses. There is a restriction that whether it's indoor dining or outdoor dining, that there be a maximum of 4 people per table, so you won't have a group of 10 or sometimes larger than that when a whole group gets together. They'll have to be at separate tables of 4, I assume, and in somewhat close proximity, but not at a singular table, as has been the case. That certainly affects certain kinds of groups that meet as luncheon or dinner groups. Many of our civic clubs, our Rotary clubs, Lions, Kiwanis, groups like that, some of the women's clubs that we have will meet in that kind of a capacity, one long table at a restaurant. That would not be permitted under the yellow zone designation. Schools are open under the yellow zone designation with mandatory weekly testing of students and teachers, staff, for in-person settings. The New York State Department of Health establishes a percentage of teachers and student staffs who need to be tested each week to ensure that there is not a growing spread of the contagion amongst the people within the school district. Now, that is a significant responsibility that is put at the doorstep of the local school districts. Your various districts are affected very greatly by this. We had a call this morning, as we do every Monday morning, with the various school superintendents. We get many, if not all, of the 44 school superintendents and attending, and many of them are very concerned over what would happen with yellow designation and the ability of those school districts to provide the proper amount of testing in order to test 20% of their people. And I've opined that if all Westchester County went to yellow in a day, we would be hard-pressed to meet the goal of testing 20% of the population of students, whatever those percentage numbers might adjust in the future. Those are established numbers by the governor to try to determine how widespread is the contagion in the district, because there are school districts that are operating on a hybrid model, where some, you're staying home part of the time, then going into classes part of the time. We have a couple of districts in Westchester County that have a full attendance model, and we have a couple of districts that have been, at least, if not right now, are fully remote. But under the yellow designation, of which there is some overlay designation right now for parts of communities, schools remain open. I'm going to come back and talk about schools in just a second to clarify what we think, as a matter of policy, the schools are facing right now. When it graduates from yellow zone to orange zone, that means that the state has determined that the level of infection is higher and potentially more dangerous. So all of these things reduce in terms of their size and external scope. Right off the bat, schools are closed. They're closed at that point in time. You may remember back in March, we closed all the schools. We had a containment zone in New Rochelle that kind of kicked over into a little bit of Tuckahoe and Eastchester, but within a short period of time thereafter, we closed all the schools. Now, because everything in the society was closed, you had parents who were home from work as well as students that were home. That's not the case at this point in time, and this becomes very difficult for parents. We recognize this is a stress on them, how we try to help handle that within our authority as a county government. We're not the state government. We cannot make these determinations or rules, but we are a partner in working with the school districts as well as the municipal governments to comply with these. The orange zone capacities reduce further what the yellow zone capacities reduce. So where we currently have a 50-person limit and the yellow zone goes down to 25, the orange zone goes down to 10 people maximum, indoor and outdoor. That's a very small gathering of people. Businesses, where you are open during the yellow designation and the orange designation, you will close high-risk, non-essential business. Gyms, personal care facilities will close under orange designation. That is happening right now in the village of Portchester. This is a difficult economic reality for those businesses. This is a difficult reality for the people that consume the services or the products of those businesses. We do not look on this as a good thing. We don't want this to happen. This is a response to the level of contagion that may exist. Houses of worship reduced down to a 33% capacity or 25-person maximum. And in practical terms, that means primarily online services by as many of those religious institutions as can do it. That is what I experienced in my faith tradition, that I would watch the Mass on television, and other churches and synagogues are providing a virtual means of communicating with their faith. And when we get to orange zone capacity, 33% or 25 people maximum is a very small number, and so that will reduce further down that situation. There is no longer under orange designation indoor dining. It is outdoor dining only, and 4 people maximum per table. So outdoor dining is the only allowable situation under the orange zone, and this is now the second half of November. It is getting colder outside. It's still possible to dine outside. It is not as comfortable as it was a week ago. We had some very high temperatures. We're very fortunate to have a very nice weekend the weekend beforehand in terms of temperature, and outdoor dining was still workable. It's still possible now. Under the orange zone designation, it is still allowable, but it is less desirable, and only 4 people maximum. This is under the orange zone designation. Should the designation rise to red zone capacity, then it becomes a cluster itself, and then all of these things start to become much more severe. The schools are closed, remote-only learning. Dining drops down to only a takeout scenario. There's no outdoor dining. Under the red zone, only essential businesses are open. Things like pharmacies will be open, and police stations will be open, but you will not see the standard retail businesses open unless they have some connection to an essential service. Mass gatherings will be prohibited. There will be no in-person events, not even at the smallest possible capacity. And then the houses of worship drop to 25% capacity, 10 people maximum, which is functionally doing the same thing. And I want to make a point because I've heard people talk about, I heard a Supreme Court Justice talk about this as an infringement upon religious faith and tradition. The Supreme Court Justice who spoke shares the same faith that I do. This is not about reducing your ability to connect with your faith. This country still believes in freedom of worship, and that freedom of worship continues. It continues in a virtual form rather than an in-person form. And the reason for that is not to reduce the voice of the faith in the society. Whatever your faith tradition may be you Christian, be you Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever your religious tradition is, it is to stop the spread of a communicable disease that is airborne, that has cost us in Westchester County over 1,480 lives, approaching 1,500 people in Westchester County. That is the purpose of these emergency situations. We went through, during the period of time of World War II, emergency circumstances that required lights to be shut off and certain activities to stop from happening. We didn't do it to restrict the activities per se. We did it to protect our homeland security during a war. And we had other restrictions that were made on things that you could buy or consume during the Depression. Now, I'm not of an age to remember the Depression directly. I heard all the stories from my parents. For some people out there watching, you lived through the Depression. You know what I'm talking about to be true. This society is a free and open society. We prize our freedom. We know that our freedom is what makes us Americans different from other societies. However, this disease is a serious disease, and to whatever extent people have called it a hoax in the past and so forth, the bodies that have piled up should clear our minds of any false sense of what the jeopardy is here. So for those who want to look at this as a restriction on your ability to be yourself, to go to a gym because you go to a gym every day, because you go to a religious institution weekly or daily, for whatever that is, these are restrictions to deal with a spike in this pandemic. That is the purpose of it. Now, here in Westchester, the red zone concentration has not yet been reached in any community, and we are making efforts alongside village, town, and city leaders, alongside state legislators, alongside the clergy, alongside the people who represent nonprofit organizations, the business leaders of our communities, the chambers of commerce, the Westchester County Association, the Business Council of Westchester. We're all working in harmony to try to prevent this from going to red zone in any location, including the current zone and any other zones that may be created, and to try to avoid this by taking proactive steps, which we'll talk about in a second. But these zones are not meant to restrict you for the sake of restriction. This is to fight the disease. And if you don't believe that is true, let me be blunt. You need to rethink your point of view. That is the reality of what we're facing. We are facing a pandemic, and we have to fight that pandemic before we lose more lives to it. And I frankly am losing patience with people that want to redefine reality and sort of take truth and try to make it not truth because it suits a predisposition that they have in their mind. I want to make a statement regarding our schools and in-school learning. As we've identified the rate of COVID-19 infection within Westchester County, we're seeing that it's rising. We know that the challenges are great in all of our communities. I've just sort of mentioned that already, and it particularly affects our school districts. The school districts that are operating in a hybrid model do so with the 6-foot social distancing protocols in place are the ones that are enabling students to be able to engage in in-person learning for part of the time and within the school facility environment. And it's very important because we all understand that children being in a physical school will learn in a better environment than when they're learning remotely. They're learning remotely now because of the difficulties we're going to have in being able to control the spread if we have that type of fully in-school situation. And that's why the hybrid and the remote structures exist. The goals of the schools, all of our districts, every one of the districts in this county, there are 44 that Westchester has. We share a couple of them with neighboring Putnam County. The goals of the schools is to serve as many young people in their facilities daily as possible. And they're also aware that there's a desire for some of the parents to have schools return to full active attendance. That's a reasonable desire. That is the way I went to school for all 13 years of my secondary school life from K to 12. That has been the American norm. That American norm is not in place now for a reason. We have a pandemic, and that pandemic is highly contagious. So with these rising cases, it is not possible to bring all the students back in school. And I understand that there are parents that desire that, A, because it's the best possible learning environment for their children, and B, it makes their lives, more workable. Because let's be honest, when you have two parents who are working, you have careers, you have economics that are necessary, to have children at home for any point in time creates a burden on that family. I recognize that, understand that to be true. That is why these are extraordinary measures that are being taken in hybrid and remote learning to try to compensate for an unusual set of circumstances. Bringing more individuals into the school building increases the density in schools, and it presents the possibility of significant risk of COVID-19 spread to students, to staff, and it risks community spread. In many communities, a child going to K-12 education represents 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of every 4 housing units in that community. So the health and safety protocols in the schools now are working to try to reduce the spread within the schools for that period of time where there is hybrid learning, where children are in school within those protocols. Now, if you sacrifice that 6-foot social distancing, we understand that there's some districts around the state that have done that, and some parents have been influenced by that, and they've reached out to the current school districts in Westchester County, and they say, well, you ought to be able to do this. They're doing this over here. They're doing this over there. And there's always somebody up and down the block. It reminds me when I would go home and say to my mom, but Johnny's mother's letting him do this. He's staying up to 11 o'clock at night. Why can't I? Or Jimmy is able to run around and do this and that in the street. He doesn't have to come back in for dinner. And my mother and father would say, here are the rules in our house. This is what makes sense in our house, and you need to understand them and follow them. And that wasn't a particularly attractive message for me to learn all those years while I was growing up, but they were right, and my natural tendency to want to do it differently was not right. The county is working closely with the school districts to try to deal with the safety and the mitigating of the efforts of what happens in the schools. And while we have hybrid models, we support the hybrid models. We all want to work to a complete in-school situation. That is our goal. But because that is not a realistic one to aspire to right now, we think the hybrid model is the next best situation with the protocols in place for testing, social distancing, and all of the other situations. And I must say, I support personally, as county executive, I support the work that the school superintendents, the school boards, the elected and the appointed administrators in the various school districts are trying to do to provide as good a possible learning experience. Nobody wants this virus to continue to linger. We hear stories that we have things to hope for with vaccines, perhaps soon to be at hand. We don't know how soon they'll be distributed, if so, over what wide basis, and when we can put this behind us. We can't put it behind us yet, but I do want to encourage school parents to understand why these school districts are operating the way they are, and that I think that that is a wise way to operate. And I do that within the rules that have been set down by the governor of the state of New York, which is within his authority to set these goals as a matter of the public health and safety of all the people who live not just in our county, but in the state of New York. All of those are very important elements. I also want to highlight that as we deal with public education, we are going out to try to communicate with people in every way we can. We had in the zone designated in Portchester going into local apartments. Yesterday we were at a particular apartments on South Regent Street in Portchester to hand out masks and to deliver some hand sanitizer to help people try to protect themselves from this. And that outreach effort includes public communications with individuals. We have robocall that's out now that try to remind everybody of the basic situations, and we certainly do it in the language of our country, which is English. But we have many of our neighbors and friends for whom Spanish is the language that they are most comfortable with. And we are not making a statement about the nature of the language. We're trying to communicate to people in the language that they best understand. Je parle français, je parle un peu. We don't have a large French-speaking population, so there's no purpose to have a robocall in French. But there is a purpose to have a robocall in Spanish and to communicate through video so that we can reach people. Because if we fail to reach people, if they fail to modify their behavior to suit the crisis of the day, then the crisis continues. This is a test of pragmatism, to do that which is pragmatic, not which is ideological, but to do that which reaches people. We've begun that aggressive campaign in both English and Spanish about the dangers and risks of COVID-19, and robocalls began in both languages on Saturday. Now, my Spanish is nowhere near as good as my French, so it won't be my voice that you hear if you get the Spanish-speaking robocall. We have a public service announcement that's in Spanish and additional videos all in Spanish, and I'd like you to watch what one of those videos looks like.
Los casos de COVID no han terminado. Ahora está regresando y está regresando más fuerte en muchos casos.
Creo que hay mucha gente que ya está fatigada, ya está cansada de hablar sobre el COVID.
Debemos seguir las instrucciones del gobierno del condado de Westchester. Nos dan para protegernos.
La máscara protege y cubre la boca, pero también la nariz. Ya vienen las fiestas y queremos reunirnos con nuestras familias y con nuestros seres queridos, pero por ahora no es el tiempo de hacer eso.
I want to touch on just two other issues that are not COVID related while we have this opportunity to speak. We have coming up this Wednesday a budget hearing by the Westchester County Board of Legislators regarding the proposed 2021 budget. You may have caught our presentation last Tuesday. It followed the COVID announcements last Monday, in which our administration, my direction, submitted to the Board of Legislators a proposed budget. That budget cuts spending, and it cuts property taxes by $1 million. It involves protection of a host of different key priorities. But the Board of Legislators is now doing the due diligence in the Budget and Appropriations Committee to look at every element of the budget. I expect that they'll have modifications to the budget, and we will discuss those modifications as the board puts their thoughts together. But there's an opportunity for you, the individual, to comment on that process. Now, traditionally, the Board of Legislators, both Ken and I at various times in our life, 20 years ago for me, 10 years ago for Ken, both chaired the County Board of Legislators. And the Board of Legislators would open up a public hearing which you could come to in person and speak out and have your voice heard as an input for the legislators as they go about the process of making those decisions. This year, the Board of Legislators wisely has made that a virtual public forum, as we've just said with our boards and commissions. So we invite your voice, they invite your voice as a separate branch of government to comment on the county budget. And if you want to testify, please call the Board of Legislators at 914-995-2800, 995-2800. They will give you the information. They'll give you a link for WebEx, which you can go on to from your home computer. You can watch the other people who will testify, and then however their queue system works, you'll get the chance to testify as well, and you'll be seen by all of the legislators as you share your thoughts. The public hearing that is coming up is this Wednesday, November 18th at 7 p.m., and we expect that the public hearing will, take a certain amount of time. Usually there's 20 or so speakers, maybe more this year. Certainly from the comfort of your home, the capacity is unlimited for the number of speakers. And I believe the way it works is they will listen to every speaker until the last speaker has spoken. And that's coming up again. We encourage you to call the Board of Legislators under the leadership of Ben Boykin, Honorable Chairman of the Board of Legislators, 914-995-2800. Wednesday, November 18th, 7 p.m. begins that public hearing. Now, last night, I'm sure every one of us experienced, I certainly did as well, we had high wind experience that rushed through the county from the west to the east, as our executive team lives in all different corners of the county, Ken in Yonkers and Catherine Chaffee up in the northern part of the county and some elsewhere. I'm on the Sound Shore. We were comparing notes about when the wind was coming through. But it was a serious wind, and it caused disruption. And once again, as has happened many more times than we'd like to report, it knocked out power services to a certain number of customers. As of last night, 4,000 customers for Con Edison and 4,000 customers for NYSEG, which is the utility that serves the northern tier of communities in Westchester County, were out. There was 8,000 outages across Westchester County as of last night. Both utilities have worked to try to reestablish power. The numbers have dropped dramatically in the aggregate. They've restored about 5,000 of the 8,000 outages. As of 1 o'clock today, Con Edison reports 1,813 outages, and NYSEG reports 1,374 outages. That's as of 1 o'clock today. We are now somewhat past 2:30 in the afternoon. We hope that some more of those are back. Perhaps if you're without power, you're not watching this. But if you are observing this on your cell phone, perhaps we have been, as we always have been, and so have the local officials and the state legislators, we have been insistent to Con Edison and to NYSEG they do everything they can to restore everybody's power. This is worth another long conversation as we approach our United Westchester report on Hurricane Isaias, which is now 3 months in the rearview mirror. But just as we experienced last night, a very brief period of time can cause a great degree of problems and discomforture for people. So those are the things that we wanted to report on. We will again be with you Thursday at 2 o'clock this week, and we'll give you further updates. We will have a Facebook Live interview with Dr. Charlena Amler, who's our Commissioner of Health. I believe we scheduled that for Wednesday, and you're certainly welcome to see that. We are not going to go back to where we were in the peak yet with daily reports. We're trying not to overtax people's levels of interest on these things, but we want to be proportionate, and clearly the increase in infection requires us to give you more recent updates. As I just said, when we jump up by 1,300 cases in the course of a week, we need to report to you more frequently on what's happening in those areas, and hopefully we'll report good news as well. We have some precautionary discussions, group calls in a couple of communities that are seeing a high spike in infections as well, and hopefully when we talk on Thursday, we'll be able to report some of the progress that we're making. And with a little bit of luck, we won't have any further zones created in Westchester County. That is to the prerogative of the governor. And hopefully we'll be able to deal with the zone that we have in Portchester and perhaps downgrade it some, which would help us all. So Catherine Chaffee, our Director of Communications, has some questions from the press. You can reach out to her, and she'll give us the questions. We'll answer them to the best of our ability. Catherine?
So the first question comes from David Proper. Any indication which parts of the county are nearing yellow zone restrictions?
Well, David, the concern that we have is not to get ahead of what the governor might decide to do. If the governor does, in fact, make a designation of a community, that is when we'll deal with it publicly. He is watching statistics and along with his key advisors. We have, however, identified, and we've said publicly, that the two factors that seem to most lead to a designated cluster is the amount of population and the density of the population. And usually density goes along with seeing more apartment dwellings in closer quarters. So Portchester certainly met that standard. Any of the Westchester communities, any of our major cities, we have 6 of them altogether. 5 of them are classic dense populations, Peekskill smaller than the other 4. But those are all ones that we have to watch very closely for infection. We also have some other villages that are similar to Portchester. They're smaller in total population, but they have a dense element of population, which could lead to this. But we're not going to speculate what might fall into that category, but we are doing precautionary community phone calls with certain communities. But we think, for the sake of public information, rather than speculate about what community might go into a zone, creating, a host of different actions before we're even ready to deal with it, we're going to try to show some foresight, work with the leaders of different communities in preparation, and if by delivering PPE, masks, by delivering sanitizing, by doing certain activities to enforce the rules that we've just talked about, we may be able to forestall it becoming a zone. And that's the hope that we're going to try to show.
Okay. The next question, also from David, is how is contract tracing operating with this quick rise in cases?
Well, we've been tested. The system has tested us greatly. When we had a contact tracing team put into place, we had identified up to 800 some odd people in Westchester County that were trained to be contact tracer. Ken went through the training and is able to contact trace. He tests me every day, talks to me, wants to know who I've seen just in case something happens. But in all seriousness, the rise in cases has really tested our ability to effectively contact trace. We also, have the natural difficulty that when you deal with an individual, to identify who they have been in contact with over the last period of time, who might have been exposed if they themselves tested positive. Individuals' memories are not complete. Sometimes they're unwilling to give all the details for whatever their reasoning is. And then when we call individuals, some individuals don't answer the phone, don't want to have contact and follow up with us. One of the concerns that we have, frankly, is that people know that if you test positive, you must isolate. And that even if you test negative, there is a precautionary quarantining that happens. And there's a certain number of people that just don't want to do it. Some because economically they fear that they'll lose pay by not working. If they don't feel that they have symptoms, why should they have to do it? Well, that's exactly how this thing spreads. And so our contact tracing has to break through the wall that can be put up by individuals to not share information. And then if told, you need to quarantine, and even more importantly, you need to isolate, an unwillingness to do it. We don't have enough of a police force available to us to go and knock on every door on a repeat basis to make sure that people are doing that which they need to do. And let me be candid. If this society wants to turn its back on common sense, then we can have ourselves one multiplied out pandemic. And we can convince ourselves, well, I have my freedom, and this is, I've been told to do it. Fine. Do it your way and watch what happens to fatalities in the country. Or do it in an intelligent way. So in the contact tracing system, as we have it, is stretched. It's absolutely stretched, and it may be stretched even more as the number of positive cases go up. We're doing our dead level best. We're not at 100% efficiency. There's no way we'll ever will be. But we think we're getting enough done to be helpful. And obviously, we need the cooperation of people to do it. We need people to understand, as I said once from the podium when I was sitting here in the very beginning of this is a matter of self-discipline. This is not a matter of the government tells you what to do. This is you yourself knowing what is right or wrong. I often make analogies of when I was a child. When I was a child, I would love to eat ice cream and cake and things that were not nutritious for me. And if left to my own devices at age 5 or age 10, that's all I would have had, And so my parents had to enforce some discipline on me until I became a grown adult, and I understood that you have to have a variety of things in your diet and balance and so forth to be healthy and survive. People need to understand that when the contact tracer calls, you need to respond. You need to tell them. And if you have to isolate, I went through, quarantining. I freely admit I was like a caged tiger, didn't like it, and things happen, and we have to deal with it. And so I think that is the answer, contact tracing. We have a trained team of people in place. They are being stretched, and we need the cooperation of people in order to have a higher level of compliance.
Next question builds on that point a bit, also from David. What message do you have for residents who continue to ignore health guidelines meant to slow the virus, either because of ideology, laziness, or they simply don't care?
Well, it depends on how visible their behavior is for us in order to do what type of compliance. We have, for example, curfews set in for certain kinds of businesses, bars, and so forth, that have to close at a certain time. The compliance leverage that the state has is the lifting of your liquor license. And if you know anything about the bar and restaurant business, having the liquor license is a major element in your profitability. No matter how badly your business may be going right now, it'll be going infinitely worse for now and the years to come when we pull out of this if you've lost your liquor license. You've completely turned your business into a different kind of business. And that is relatively easy to enforce. What happens when you are in your private car and you drive it and you determine you're going to drive into a state that has a high infection rate, and then you're going to drive back, you're not going to tell anybody. You're not going to isolate for 14 days. You're not going to get a COVID test. You're not going to know. You're just going to not worry about it until you get sick. It's very hard to enforce that because you'd have to sort of know what that person is doing. And for all of the criticisms that some people have about the restriction of their freedoms, we are in no way moving in a way that we could effectively monitor the latter example of what I've said. You get in your car and disappear. You know, we're not reading plates and cross-referencing them against all the possible other places. We read your plate at the Delaware Memorial Bridge, you know, whatever kind of craziness people think. That's not happening in this government today. So it does require individuals to a greater extent to comply voluntarily. We can enforce certain elements of this in a public park setting. We have used, as I've said, I think a number of times, we've used our police and our parks department to interact with people in seeking compliance, not seeking punishment. So, you know, put on a mask. You have a mask. You don't have a mask. We have a mask for you here. Wear a mask while you're out in public and you're in contact with other people. We want compliance. Now, some communities, Newcastle has imposed a very hefty fine. They've only written a few tickets against that fine. But the bottom line is the capacity to ramp up enforcement will come if there's widespread, refusal to enforce it. But, you know, the only thing I can tell you is if you understand what the virus does to some people, then you would naturally say, I can't afford to do that. The problem is, for some people, they just haven't had exposure to it. They don't have a loved one, a friend, who has gotten seriously sick of COVID or died. If you have, talk to that person. Let them tell you what it was like when they were being intubated and how close they came to death. I've had 3 stories people told me like that. And then if you still need to have some advice, then I invite you to join us when we have refrigerator trucks of bodies with tow tags on them, stacked up in a refrigerated vehicle in one location or another, because we do not have enough capacity to deal with the number of people that died within a period of time. And then tell me about what you think your rights should be and shouldn't be when we have dead bodies stacked up like that. I lose my patience with that. It's all I can do to maintain sort of a corporate demeanor in discussing things with people who just will not understand this is a fatal disease. This is not just like the flu. This does not have a death ratio that is like the flu. You can play with numbers all you want. You can talk about who died and try to redefine that their death was because of something else. The person was alive and they're dead now. And that's what happens if we don't do these things. And so I'm happy to show how do we enforce it. We have to enforce it in certain tools that we have. We have to force it inside the mind of individuals and inside the heart of individuals. And they must understand this is a test of the nation and of you as an individual. And you fail the test if you have 50 reasons why you don't want to do what common sense tells you you must do.
The next question comes from Peter Katz. Do you think it's realistic in asking businesses to use the county cuts to the workforce as an example, not county cuts, county reductions, as an example of what to do given their tough economic situation?
I think it depends on the business. And I think I made the point, Peter, that if you are in an administrative office context, we have corporate headquarters of some major corporations. It is not a manufacturing plant environment. It is an operation where marketing and finance and a host of other reviews happen at the highest level of a corporation. Those corporations use their skill set, use their technology to work remotely. It's not shut your business down. It's have your key people work remotely so that you can sit at home on your laptop and do some of the same functions that you can do. Now, I differentiated with the county. I said, we can't cut down to 0 the number of people that work at a wastewater treatment plant. And we can't cut down to 0 the number of people that work at jail. And that is equivalent to what happens when you have individuals who run a manufacturing facility or something where the service level involves the personal presence of the individual in providing the service of the product, usually a service industry. So I don't equate all elements of the county government because I've already said that there are differentiation in the county government. Ken made that point when he talked about this. So I think the analogy, Peter, is for each business to look at their operations and say to themselves, you know, if we have an HR function, county has an HR function, we have an HR function. We have a budget department that handles budgetary issues for us. They have a county budget department. How different are the functions of those departments? We have a finance department. We have a law department. Can those functions work remotely for a major corporation, small business, large business? And I would suspect that more than not, they can work remotely. We can't mandate them to do this. We're not telling them you will do this by law. The governor might do that yet. We're trying to prevent that from happening. We're trying to prevent a shutdown of the society. We want to maintain that you can eat outdoors and dining and not lose that privilege. So that's why we say, look at, just as we said a second ago about the individual, look at it from the business standpoint, understanding the way you operate, and determine how much of your operation can you reduce in a way that would allow your operation to function, not shut it down, but allow it to function, but function remotely. And it depends on the nature of the business. It depends on how many people work in your business. And that's also why we've had grant programs for some of the small businesses, because in small businesses, you may not have a large enough function to do that. You know, one person is doing all that. They work remote. Everybody else that performs the functions necessary for your business to thrive have to do it in person. So not everyone's able to do that. But where we can do that, we have the opportunity to reduce the potential of the spread.
Okay. Next question, also from Peter, is, after the election, have you heard anything from Washington contacts on additional aid for governments and people and businesses that counters the Republican hardline position?
No. What we have right now is a debate going on in the society as to, the current president believes that he has won the election. His supporters believe that they somehow can prove that there was fraud. I've seen no evidence of it, but that is still in the air. And while it's in the air, the Senate is not of a mind to sit down and discuss any additional support packages. So the HEROES Act, which passed the House of Representatives, is not likely to pass this Senate as it's constructed. There are two elections everybody knows is coming up in January in Georgia. They will determine who controls the Senate, depending on how they turn out, and then you'll know whether or not the Senate leadership is constructed one way or a different way, and whether they'll be able to consider a package. I think those of us in local government are on our own at this stage of the game, and as it's worked out, as I've watched the proposed budgets, most of the municipal governments have been able to work through and handle the economic difficulty thrown at them, and I opined when we talked about this before, is that they rely on property tax more than any other revenue stream, and the property tax revenue stream has stayed in place to the greater extent. The county, because we did get a direct outlay of COVID money, we were able to appropriately charge certain costs to COVID cares, and we also did some innovative programs, and that's allowed us to have some economy. We also cut our workforce by 5%, and we did a couple of other maneuvers that saved us millions of dollars. And so we've been able to land this year's budget and hopefully next year's budget in a stable fashion. The state still has a significant budget gap, and we don't know if the state is going to make decisions that will then affect the county after we close our budget. We don't know that yet. But there clearly needs to be a federal government response. And I think it comes down to a simple reality. Are we in this together, or are we in it alone? And if you are in a state that you think doesn't benefit from this, I don't know why, because now the virus is everywhere. Back in the spring, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Michigan were hit, and people sitting in other states of the country says, oh, isn't it bad what happened there? It's like calling this the China virus. Oh, that's in China that had to deal with it. China and Italy had it a little bit. Maybe it's in Europe a little bit. Now it's everywhere. North Dakota, parts of Texas, in Arizona, in Nevada, and again in New York and Massachusetts and New Jersey and so forth. So it's a nationwide situation. An unwillingness for the federal government, for whatever ideological reasons there are, to assist the local governments, wherever that means it means you're going to lose police on the street. It means you're going to lose firefighters ready there to fight a fire. You're going to lose sanitation men to help us maintain proper sanitation in the streets and dispose of garbage in a proper way. That's what the impact is going to be. And, no matter how it's framed in this dual narrative world where a fact isn't a fact, it's just a point of view that I hold within my ideology, this country will suffer. And we'll see if the new president will have an ability to manufacture some compromise if that's possible, and I hope for the best.
And this is the last question. It's also from Peter Katz. Governor Cuomo called on local governments to help enforce state requirements. What enforcement action has the county taken, and what's planned for enforcement if the numbers continue to grow?
Well, what happens prospectively depends on where we see the growth occur. Right now, if you look at the broad-based situations, we have ensured that there are no public functions that break the parameters that have been set aside. We've canceled all different kinds of activities and things to enforce the discipline that's necessary. We are trying within our legal authority to do the things that we can do, and we're also trying to show a model behavior, if you will. That was a whole conversation about what we're doing with our own workforce to show that it is possible to do this and to go forward. The enforcement mechanism, as I said, involves the county where we have day-to-day local control. That's in the village of Mount Kisco, to some extent in the town of Cortland, where we have intermunicipal agreements to provide that street policing function. We police on the highways, in which, normally speaking, you pull a car over if they're weaving, they're showing bad behavior, if they're speeding. You wouldn't know whether a person is doing something, untoward, and to enforce it in our parks. And of course, we're going to be more aggressive now, although going into the winter, you get less park usage in the wintertime than you do in the summertime and the springtime. So we are trying to have our police be supportive to back up local police. Certain communities have very small number of police and police departments. If they need that assistance, we provide that backup assistance to them to help enforce this. But we have not reached that point, because you already have people complaining in the society, you're making me wear a mask, you're making me do these things, you're taking away my freedom. We haven't yet started to have any kind of mass interdiction with people where we're writing tickets out, on a regular basis. So we're trying to, as I said, use the threat of enforcement to gain compliance rather than to create conflict, which apparently will happen in certain contexts when people feel that their personal rights are greater than dealing with this health situation. So the direct answer is we're encouraging our police, which has the authority to write tickets and ultimately to do more than that to an individual that's not compliant, to use their authority to gain compliance. If it gets worse, then we reserve the right to go to the next step. But no one is going to take anything off the table, and no one is going to guarantee that they're going to take this action. We'll take the actions proportionate to the situation as we see it. Very good. That's the last question. So thank you for watching. We'll be back on Thursday at 2 o'clock. Remind you again, Wednesday, 7 o'clock, the Board of Legislators has a public hearing on the county budget. You're welcome to access information, westchestergov.com is our website. I'm sure you don't want to cuddle up with the county budget, but if you have such a mind to do that, it's there for you to watch and to read and to understand what we're going to do. And, look, I think I've said it 19 times. Why not say it just the 20th time? This is about us as individuals. Are we prepared to make the sacrifices necessary to deal with this, or will we have 15 different narratives that lead us in a different direction? And I think we know what happens if we fool ourselves into thinking there's an easy way out. We won't get out of this. But if we show the discipline and the force of will, we'll get out of this, and we'll get out of it together. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. Stay safe.